We are actually blessed with two special people here tonight. One is our guest speaker, of course, but the other is the Right Reverend Alexi Smith, who is the director of the Archdiocesan Office of Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs in our Archdiocese. And he's committed to this dialogue, and he knows Father very well, and so he's going to do our introduction. He is pastor of the St. Andrew Russian Greek Catholic Church in El Segundo, and administrator of St. Paul Melkite Greek Catholic Mission in El Segundo as well. But he's been involved in this dialogue and this quest to lead us in this ecumenical and interfaith dialogue. So with that, I'm turning it over to Father Alexi. Welcome back.
Please. Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be back at Holy Family and to see many familiar faces. You said you came when I spoke before, and you came back again. Wow, well, we'll have to improve the act somewhat, you know. Seriously, it seems incredible that, Frank, you said that was a year ago, a little over a year ago, I think, maybe a year and a half ago, that we had that initial presentation here on what I term throughout the Archdiocese Islam 101, where I partner with my colleague and friend Milia Islam Majid, and we present that little program. I talk about the history of the Catholic Church's relations with Islam, and Milia presents what Muslims believe and what they do not believe. And then we get very bold and daring, and we open it up for questions and answers, and a lot of those stereotypical images that we've all had of one another melt away, they disappear. And from that initial presentation then, we offered here, I think this was the third or fourth time in the Archdiocese that we offered that program, which we call St. Francis of Assisi and the Sultan, based on the wonderful picture that was up here just a moment ago, and a book by the same title, authored by George Dardis and Marvin Cryer-Mitch. The book and the program begin with an intriguing examination of a meeting that took place between St. Francis of Assisi and Sultan Malik in 1219 during a lull in the fighting during the Fifth Crusade. And from there, we examine those points of resonance, and we acknowledge those areas of difference between Muslims and Christians. And the beauty of your experience of that here, from my perspective, was that you elected, after I left, after those 8 sessions together, you elected to remain together. And you've elected to meet, I believe you meet monthly or periodically in any case, and you've done some wonderful things together. You visited the mosques, you went here to church, you stood by one another during some very difficult times. These are all wonderful things, and I have to tell you that I've used your parish here as an example for other parishes considering the same program throughout the Archdiocese. And please don't be surprised, Frank and others of the parish staff here, if the Tidings contacts you soon, because I believe it's going to be, Tidings is our Catholic newspaper here, they may do a story on that dialogue here, because they covered the program when we began it in the South Bay some time ago. But you didn't come here to rest on your laurels, did you? You came here then for a specific purpose tonight. And so we're blessed to have with us Father William from the St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. Welcome to Southern California, my friend. Father William received his undergraduate and Master of Divinity degrees from St. John's. He earned a licentiate in sacred theology from the Gregorian University in Rome and a doctorate in homiletics from Princeton Theological Seminary. Father William serves as the Secretary General for the Monastic Interreligious Dialogue. And that's an international organization which promotes and supports dialogue, especially dialogue at the level of religious experience and practice between Christian monastic men and women and followers of other religions. In the year 2002, he co-edited, this wonderful book entitled Monks and Muslims, which I have found most useful. And I don't often endorse books, but I do endorse this one. In February of 2014, Father William was appointed a consultor to the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue. On a personal note, I had the privilege of not only meeting but working with Father William at the Vatican last June when we were invited to participate in a week-long Buddhist Catholic dialogue there. And so it's a great privilege for me to welcome my interreligious colleague and friend back to Los Angeles here. I understand you have free time. Free time. That's two words I don't know, free time. But in his free time, he plays the cello in local orchestras. Yeah, I'd like to experience the free time, let alone playing the cello. Father William is uniquely qualified to address our group this evening on the topic, Challenges and Promise of Interreligious Dialogue, Nostra Aetate 50 years later, where we've been, or where we have come, and where we hope to go. Father William, welcome to Los Angeles.
So just to say how pleased I am to be here, delighted to be here. Special thanks to Angela Howell, who was my contact and who sort of got this all started. So I really, it's most grateful. Just a little bit of background about where I come from. As you heard, my academic work is not in the area of interreligious dialogue. It all started when in 1994, my abbot asked me to go to Japan. Because we had a branch monastery in Japan, and I decided if I'm going to go to Japan, I better learn something about the religious situation there. So I got in touch with actually a Jesuit priest who put me in touch with a Zen master. I started practicing Zazen with this master. It's continued to be a part of my spiritual practice to the present day. That got me involved with this group called Monastic Interreligious Dialogue in the United States. I eventually became a member of the board, then the secretary, then the president, and then the international secretary general, who was planning to leave that position, asked me if I would be willing to succeed him, and I did, and one thing leads to another. So it's something that I've learned about more in doing than actually in studying about. I don't have that kind of vast academic background that enables me to cite different passages and quotes, but I think for one reason or another I've had a good bit of experience, and that has been an enriching experience for me. Monks are involved in dialogue because monks, as Benedict says, are truly monks when they search for God. And to be in touch with other God searchers can only reinforce our commitment to that search and actually inform it and help us. Now, tonight, what I want to do, and it's always a little difficult to come into a group that you're meeting for the first time because I'm not quite sure where you are, what kind of background there's been, and I expect within the group there's all sorts of different kinds of background and experience. So basically what I want to do, and in a kind of rapid-fire way, I've got a lot of slides here. I don't want to overwhelm you with a lot of information, but I want at least to give you some idea of just how much this has become a part of Catholic identity, interreligious dialogue. A former president of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, Archbishop Michael Fitzgerald, said he would go so far as to say that it is now the fifth mark of the Church. One, holy, Catholic, apostolic, and dialogic. He says it's become that significant as part of our identity. What it is that makes us Catholics is that we are open to dialogue, to a relationship, a positive relationship of sharing with other religious traditions. Now, that's a rather optimistic statement given the fact that not everyone is so convinced about this and sees more the problems than the promise. But it has, in an amazing about-face, which I'll say a little bit more about, shaped the church of the 21st century, and really within the last 50 years, because that's when the shift took place. Now, just a bit of introduction to what I have prepared here. So first of all, something about this document from the Second Vatican Council, Nostra Aetate, in our time. and the 50th Anniversary International Conference that was held last year. Then something about the precursors and pioneers of interreligious dialogue within the Catholic Church. And then I want to say something about John Paul II, an absolutely incredible promoter of dialogue in ways that I think are not so well known. So I just want to quickly go through all sorts of different addresses that he made on his international apostolic visits to other countries. And then something about the organization I'm involved with, what it is we do. Father Alexi has already given you a little bit of background on that. Our primary dialogue partners are monks, but in more recent years, we've turned much more directly to dialogue with Islam, with Muslims. And then something about the Catholics and Muslims in dialogue and what that means from my point of view. And obviously here I defer to your experience because you've already had a rich experience in this. So something, first of all, about Nostra Aetate. Notice the title, A Declaration on the Relation of the Church to Non-Christian Religions. Sometimes it's talked about as a dialogue as a document on interreligious dialogue, but it's really a dialogue on how do we relate to other religions, and not really so much to religions, how do we relate to other religious people? So it's a very personal dimension. That is significant. It's a document of the Second Vatican Council, but it was Pope Paul VI who promulgated it 50 years ago last year on October 28th, which is a kind of favorite day, and I can easily remember it because for 10 years of my initial monastic life, I had a different name. We had to take a different name when we entered the monastery if there was another monk with our name. My name was Godwin for 10 years. And October 28th is the feast of St. Godwin, just in case you didn't know that. So why is this such a significant document? And what do we know about it? First of all, it wasn't on the original agenda of the Second Vatican Council. The Vatican sent out to all the bishops of the world requests for what should this council be addressing. No one spoke about the Church's relationship to other religions. Not even bishops from countries in which the majority were not Catholic. The bishops in East Asia, for example, or Northern Africa. No one. So how did it happen? It happened because it was originally intended as a document on the Church's relation to the Jewish people. Remember, we're talking about the Vatican Council, which goes from approximately 61 to 64, but preliminary work already beginning in the 50s, which means we are only less than 2 decades away from the Shoah, from the Holocaust. And it was specifically Pope John the 23rd who said, we have to do something about this. And more specifically, because Pope John the 23rd received a visit from a French historian by the name of Jules Isaac, who was Jewish, who lost his entire family in the Shoah, and who devoted himself to studying the history of the Catholic Church's relation to the Jewish people. And what he uncovered was a long history of what he called the teaching of contempt for the Jewish people. And he said that was really underlying this horrible anti-Semitism that erupted in the late 30s, early 40s. And Jules Isaac came to visit Pope John the 23rd on June 13th, 1960. 5 months later, the Pope directed Cardinal Augustin Bea to draft a declaration on the Catholic Church's relationship to the Jewish people. Now then, political issues began to arise, especially coming from bishops in Muslim countries, saying, unfortunately, this may then be interpreted as the Church's standing behind the establishment of the State of Israel. So they foresaw that this was going to become a complicated process. And so for that reason, the document was not only for that reason, but in large measure for that reason, the document became a document on the church's relationship to the other major religions of the world. The majority of the document, and there will be handouts for those of you who'd like to see it, it's not a long document, the majority of it does deal with the church's relationship to the people of Israel, to the Jewish people. But it includes its relationship to the other major religions, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism specifically, but in a very brief way. Interestingly, it's the shortest of all the conciliar documents. Just over 1,500 words. When you compare it to Lumen Gentium, the document on the church, 27,000 words. Gaudium et Spes, the document on the church's relationship to the modern world, 33,000, more than 33,000 words. So it's a very brief document, but I think we can say that it is perhaps the most revolutionary document of the Second Vatican Council. And that revolutionary sea change, that turnabout, is that in every official church document prior to Nostra Aetate, there was never anything positive said about other religious traditions. The primary word was anathema. It is condemned. We condemn it. And now you have this shift from anathema to dialogue and collaboration. And that is just a remarkable shift. And we'll see the remarkable character of that just more briefly. And then, as I say, something needs to be said about precursors and pioneers, because sometimes you think these documents just kind of exploded without any preparation. No, there were Catholic people involved prior to the Second Vatican Council, and much of their work, their writings, and their example made this document possible. And I just briefly like to highlight some of those. I call them precursors and pioneers. First precursor, you've heard about him already, Francis of Assisi, and his audience with the Sultan of Egypt, Malik al-Kamil, in 1219, in the midst of the Fifth Crusade. And we could spend a whole evening on that, but that certainly is significant. Francis going, I think he went to try to convert him, but he comes away being impressed by the genuine religious character of this man and the religion he represents. He even goes back to Assisi and says, you know what we have to do? We have to start ringing the bells 5 times a day in Assisi to call the people to prayer. Yeah. He says, that's what the Muslims are doing, you know. We should be doing the same thing. Another precursor, a very important one, a Jesuit missionary to China by the name of Matteo Ricci, who again is not going to China to engage in interreligious dialogue. He's going there as a missionary. But again, becomes impressed by and respectful of the religious traditions of China, the Confucian, Tao, and Buddhist religions of China. So these are some of the precursors. Pioneers more in the 20th century, Jules Montchanin, a very highly educated and sophisticated French theologian who leaves everything and goes to India to become part of that Indian religious tradition. And then joining him is a Benedictine monk by the name of Henri Le Sceau. And together they found an ashram called Shantivanam or Satchitananda in India. Henri Le Sceau is, again, one of these precursors who just plunges headlong into the religious traditions of India, specifically what's called the Advaita, the non-duality of, it's God is not other than I, which is not to say that God and I are the same, but we're not other. I frankly don't understand it, but it's part of that deep, deep religious tradition that we call Hinduism. Another pioneer, this one with Buddhism, is a Jesuit from Alsace-Lorraine, so he's German, even though the name seems French, who goes to Japan. He's actually in Hiroshima when the atom bomb is dropped. But he becomes, again, because he said, if I'm going to be here in Japan, I have to understand what these people are shaped by, their religious tradition. He becomes a great promoter of Zen practice for Christians because of his association with a Roshi in Japan, Yamada Roshi, whose son I studied with, because he was so open to Christians. Yamada Roshi used to say, you know, Zen is like drinking tea. You don't have to be a Buddhist to drink tea, and you don't have to be a Buddhist to practice Zazen. It's a practice that you can use. And I could go into the sorts of experiences I had in Japan, some which were really very significant in my life. A person with whom I've just become familiar recently, Edmond Bizet, another Frenchman. This one goes to Thailand. And again, he is so amazed and overwhelmed by the depth of wisdom of the Buddhist tradition, not the Mahayana, but the Theravada Buddhist tradition in Thailand. Unfortunately, the Thai bishops didn't really approve of what he was doing so much, and they sent him back to France. But what is especially amazing to me about Edmond Bizet, he goes back to France and he never says a negative word about the fact that he had been sent back and not allowed to continue. He becomes a simple curé de campagne, a country priest in Japan. And I think, to me, that authenticates his practice more than anything else. Great pioneer with Islam, again, not because he's so much engaged in dialogue with Islam, but because he respected it. Charles de Foucault, the founders of the Little Brothers of Jesus, or not, he wasn't the founder, he's the spiritual inspiration of the Little Brothers and Sisters of Jesus. But a person who had a great impact on the Vatican Council was Louis Massignon, again, a French scholar. I gave you a scholarly looking picture of him here, who basically rediscovered his Catholic faith thanks to his contact with Muslims. He just saw something there that moved him so deeply. And he died, as you see, as the council was meeting, but certainly his open and positive approach to Islam greatly influenced the council document. Now here's just one little excerpt from that document, which I think, for me, it just shows just how revolutionary it was. There's the thing about the church, accepts everything that is of value in other religions. But here it says, the church therefore exhorts her children, and I changed that a bit. It exhorts her sons in the original document, but, this was 1960. You can't expect them to be. So, exhorts her children that through dialogue and collaboration, and I think that's significant, dialogue and collaboration, with the followers of other religion, carried out with prudence and love in witness to the Christian faith and life, they recognize, preserve, and promote the good things, spiritual and moral, as well as the socio-cultural values found among these people. I think that's absolutely incredible. That Catholics, that one of our missions is to recognize, preserve, and promote the spiritual values of other religions. You just want to say, where did that come from? I could see that we respect other religions, or maybe even tolerate other religions, that we don't speak ill of them, but that we recognize, preserve, and promote their spiritual values. I think in those three verbs, and those are literal translations of the Latin, in those three verbs, we find the absolutely revolutionary character of this document. And this is a challenge that we've just begun to try to incorporate. And as I said, the meeting in Rome 50 years later took place in commemoration of the promulgation of this document. I think you see me there, waiting to give my little word of introduction on behalf of monastic interreligious dialogue. I have to say I was disappointed in the conference. The speakers were mainly academic, talking about philosophical foundations of dialogue and biblical foundations and all the rest. My sense was they didn't actually have a lot of experience. They were the academics, sort of standing back from it and trying to, find the eternal truths. I have to say, about the only thing I remember from the conference was a woman, representative of the World Council of Churches, who got up. One of the speakers had gone on and on about Abraham welcoming the 3 visitors to his tent as a marvelous example of interreligious dialogue. And in fact, there's a Jewish interpretation of that passage which says, Abraham is welcoming idolaters. because he's the first monotheist. So everybody else worships other gods. Huh? So Abraham welcomes idolaters and gives them this feast. And this woman said, I agree, Abraham is a wonderful model of hospitality and interreligious dialogue, but she says, it's not that difficult to be hospitable to someone if you know they're going to leave right after lunch. And in my short little presentation, I tried to explain how we as monks involved in interreligious dialogue, they help us. People of other religious traditions share with us their search for what is of ultimate value, and they help us Christians, monks and all Christians, in our search for God. It's not just that we want to learn more about them, but also we want to be inspired, and are, by their dedication, by their commitment, by their faith. Following that conference, there was a papal general audience on interreligious dialogue in which he greeted some of the representatives of this group that was there, Father Alexei being one of them. We're getting onto that. This is the one on October 28th. But in which I also got my 5-second photo op with the Pope. Okay. But what I want to do is go to something else, and that was the meeting that Father Alexei talked about, in which the Pope, this meeting of Buddhists and Catholics from the United States, was called a meeting about fraternity and dialogue, and what Pope Francis is trying to say is that dialogue needs to lead to working together for the good of all people. That's ultimately what we come together in dialogue. It's not just exchanging ideas, but how do we collaborate? And I think to show how important he thought this approach to interreligious dialogue was, he granted us a private audience, which is, you can imagine how many thousands of groups write to the Vatican saying, the Pope needs to give us a private audience because we're doing something very important, and the fact that he would choose us. So I just want to play you a little short clip of
une même radicalité dans la consécration, dans la recherche de l'ultime, dans le don de soi aussi, et donc dans la prière, dans la méditation, et toutes ces choses-là résonnent en moi et sont un appel.
Va bene.
And this is good.
Questo è salute.
This is health.
E in questo momento storico tanto ferito di guerre, di odio.
In this moment which is wounded by wars and hatred.
Questi piccoli gesti sono seme di pace e di fraternità.
These small gestures are seeds of peace and fraternity.
Vi ringrazio tanto.
I really thank you for this.
E il Signore vi benedica.
And may God bless you.
As he went to greet everyone, Pope Francis was overwhelmed with gifts, from different kinds of artwork to books.
We are with St. John Church and Mary Knox in San Francisco.
The 46 participants all live in America. They came from New York City, Chicago, San Francisco, Berkeley, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C.
Your honors from the shop, thank you for your leadership.
While receiving gifts, the Pope also gave blessings. And the Pope himself received a Buddhist blessing.
It's a Buddhist blessing.
Questa è una benedizione buddista da parte della mia comunità.
In the past, dialogues between the two religious groups focused on mutual understanding. However, in this meeting, the focus is on how they can work together to address social problems. Pope Francis clearly enjoyed the event as he was beaming on his way out of the meeting. The dialogue will take place from June 23rd to 27th. It is being hosted by the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue and the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops.
So it was a very brief meeting, a little longer than you saw here, but I think so touching in its simplicity. You know, he says you're engaged, you're planting seeds. He says, and these little gestures are of tremendous importance. And again, it was such an honor. Now, as I said, I want to give just a very kind of quick overview of the example and teaching of Saint John Paul II, Pope John Paul II. There you see him on his election day in 1978, and his last public appearance 3 days before he died. Yeah. Second longest papacy in the history of the church, if you don't count St. Peter. Pius IX, I think, went beyond him by about 7 years, but he had almost 27 years as Pope. But before talking about John Paul, it's important to say a word about Pope Paul. You see him here. Does that picture come out very clearly? It looks a little... This is a painting that hangs right inside the front door of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue in Rome. And it's an imaginative portrayal. This isn't a scene that actually took place, but of Pope Paul's openness to the representatives of other religious traditions. Because it was really an encyclical, a document of Pope Paul called Ecclesiam Suam, his church, in which the word dialogue enters official Catholic vocabulary. Okay? That encyclical is written in 1964, but he really focuses on it as a mark of the church. The meetings of Pope John Paul II with the Dalai Lama, there were 8 of them. And I've read somewhere, I wasn't able to track it down, that he gave more private audiences to the Dalai Lama than to any other person during his time. Many of those meetings were private, simply because they didn't want them politicized, for propaganda uses because of the whole situation of Tibet. But he met with him 8 times and met with him as an authentic spiritual master. And the Dalai Lama says the same thing about him. One of his first trips, he goes to Manila, but he gives a radio address to all of Asia. The Catholic Church wishes to do everything possible to cooperate with other believers in preserving, notice he picks up that word from Nostra Aetate, preserving all that is good in their religions and cultures. So he's saying that right from the beginning. In Tokyo, you, speaking to the Buddhists of Tokyo, of Japan, you are the heirs and guardians of a venerable wisdom, and I am happy that God has entrusted these gifts to you. In Nigeria, speaking to Muslims, what I think is significant here, you can read it through for yourself, but the final part, in a true sense, we can call one another brothers and sisters in faith in the one God. Very clear in his statements on that line. In Thailand, he greets the Buddhist patriarch, and then at a mass, he preaches to the Catholics of Thailand, saying, the majority of your fellow citizens embrace Buddhism, and as the people of Thailand, you Catholics, as people of Thailand, you are the heirs of the ancient and venerable wisdom of the Buddhists. Amazing thing. The Pope telling the Catholics, you are heirs of this wisdom, this deep spiritual wisdom that is part of your tradition. And then speaking to indigenous people in Ecuador in 1985, even before the Christian faith arrived in this land, God was present and enlightening your path. I remember I was in Brazil from 1985 to 1990 with Marinol, a missionary organization, and people at that point were already preparing for the anniversary of 1492, and the coming of Christianity to the New World. And some Brazilian theologians were saying, before Jesus arrived in Brazil, the Holy Spirit was already here. So, not to say that it wasn't good that Jesus arrived, but let's not say it all began then. The Spirit was already at work. And then a famous speech of his to young Muslims in Morocco. which I think so impressed the Muslim world so deeply. I believe God invites us to change our old practices. He's talking now about the Catholic Church. We must respect each other and stimulate each other in good works. I can still remember a talk given by an Anglican priest in England who spoke about the presence of Islam in England was acting as a provocation. And by that he meant it was provoking Christians to take their faith more seriously because they saw the Muslims taking their faith so seriously. The Christians were saying, ooh, and so they were stimulated in that sense to become more intentional Christians. And then his visit to the Synagogue of Rome, the first visit ever by a pontiff. Now it's become kind of de rigueur, but still meaningful. Full awareness of the many ties that bind us, wishes to be recognized and respected in its own identity. We're not looking for some kind of amalgam here. But this famous event in Assisi in 1986, when Pope John Paul invited the representatives of really all the world's religions to come together in Assisi to pray for peace. And there was a lot of controversy about that, and they had to kind of, tread lightly, and then they began to say, well, we didn't come together to pray, we didn't come to pray together, we came together to pray. Okay, say, okay, if we've got to do that. But in fact, there was a lot of opposition within the Curia, within the official offices of Rome to this meeting. And so on his address, his annual Christmas address to the Curia that year, Pope John Paul used it as an opportunity to explain what he did and to, as it were, justify it. And he says, again, you can read that for yourself, specifically that non-Christian religions have meaning and value. And we have to recognize, preserve, and promote that. And then he goes on and speaks specifically of prayer. And he says, every authentic prayer is inspired by the Holy Spirit, no matter who does it. If it's an authentic prayer, it's inspired by the Holy Spirit. And he quotes that passage from Romans chapter 8. It's a wonderful address, the whole address that he gives to the Curia, explaining why Assisi was so important and was in fact in line with basic Catholic teaching and Catholic faith. Bishops of Mali, speaking of traditional African religions. You go on the website and you'll find very conservative groups pointing to this and saying, what's this? The Pope is, endorsing voodoo. It's just no. He's saying these are deep religious traditions, and we have to recognize that they may be they may be an integral part of the common good of humanity. In his bishop to the Asian Bishops' Conference in Manila, he said, correct misunderstandings, foster solidarity, and build a more just and human society. In New Delhi, it's never an attempt to impose our own views. If dialogue is used that way as an attempt to impose our own views, it's wrong. We listen respectfully, seek to discern all that is good and holy, and all that favors peace and cooperation. And then again, this is just for you to read, but that marvelous symbolic gesture of Pope, this old, frail, crippled Pope going to the Western Wall and putting his prayer in the crevices of the wall of the old temple. And that was his prayer. That's what he wrote on that piece of paper that he's putting into the wall. It's a prayer asking for forgiveness of our brothers and sisters whom we have so grievously offended. In Damascus, at the Umayyad Great Mosque, and this to me is the most significant, that we begin to present our two religions not in opposition, but in partnership for the good of the human family. I mean, that is a powerful statement. That our tradition, our past has been marked by opposition, that anathema. We are against them. And he said, no, partnership for the good of the human family. And then shortly before his death, I think, had to actually give this in writing to the bishops of Tanzania about harmony between religions as a shining example of, in Tanzania, if that were to be the case. Just one little incident. I think, again, I hope I don't do too many of these things because I will run out of time. Do you remember last November, I think it was? Yeah, we're already in May. This was last November. A bus in Tanzania, no, it's Kenya. I'm sorry, it's Kenya, but close enough. Shahad, the Somali group, stopped the bus, got all the Christians off, and killed them. Okay? 1 month later, on that same road, Shahaz, is that the name of the group? I'm saying? Al-Shabaab, stopped another bus. The driver saw them coming. He locked the door. He said, I want all the Muslim women on the bus to share their hijab with the Christian women on the bus. I want the Muslim men to share a headdress with the Christian men. They forced their way into the bus. They asked the bus driver, tell all the Christians to get off. He said, we have no Christians on this bus. So they ordered them all out. And then they asked, who are the Christians on this bus? And nobody would say. And one of the Muslims said, they are our brothers and sisters. If you want to kill them, kill us too. And in fact, they killed 2 of the Muslims, wounded the driver, and then fled because they heard other cars coming. To me, that's an incredible example, one that we don't nearly hear enough about, those kinds of examples, and I'm sure that's one of many. Now, I don't want to spend much time on monastic interreligious dialogue, our past history, where we came from, what we're all about. It is basically a dialogue. We interpret monastic widely to mean dialogue of religious experience and practice, okay? We're not theologians. We don't get together to discuss theology. Inevitably, theological questions rise, but our focus is not on that. The kind of key events are exchanges with monasteries of other religious communities. And the spiritual exchange with Japanese Zen Buddhists has been going on now for about 30 years, where Buddhists come to Europe generally to spend time in Christian monasteries in Europe, and Christian monks and nuns go to Japan to spend time there. John Paul met one of those groups in '87 and spoke about it, how much hospitality is significant in these kinds of meetings. Opens the way for an ever deeper spiritual dialogue. And this is the last exchange that took place in, oops, I'm going to have to go back and find it again. Because there, I just want to give you a sense of what those are like. So again, this is just to get a feel of what we mean by dialogue. It doesn't mean sitting down and having, serious discussions all the time. It means experiencing a life. 2 German monks are in that group. These are the 2 Germans. And they're obviously in a zendo practicing zazen in this monastery in Kamakura. They're coming from the zendo now on their way to breakfast. They take table prayers very seriously. So just to give you a sense of what that's all about. In the United States, the interreligious dialogue has I would say its sort of signature events are gatherings that take place at Thomas Merton's Abbey, beginning in 1996, and the most recent one just this year. Those meetings are, again, focused primarily on spiritual practice. We are present for one another's meditation or prayer, and we deal with topics about our monastic life. But at that meeting in 2002, the Buddhist nuns, and this was interesting, the Buddhist nuns approached the Catholic nuns and said, you know, you ladies have been in this country for about 150 years. You didn't start here. You came here from another place. You had to learn about adapting to an American way of life while preserving your religious ideals and commitment. We're much newer at this, you know, and we think we've got something to learn from you. So that's how Nuns in the West started, okay? With its first meeting in 2003 at the Shilai Temple nearby in Hacienda Heights. And basically, and then, you know, we guys said, you know, they're onto something, so we decided we were going to do the same thing. So we got a Monks in the West meeting going in 2004. But basically what we're trying to do in these meetings, we, Christian and Buddhist monks and nuns, trying to say, what does it mean to lead a monastic life in a culture that is as materialistic and as much so focused on entertainment as contemporary U.S. culture? What does it mean to be a monk or a nun in this culture? What does it mean to be a monk or a nun in this culture that speaks meaningfully to people who are not monks and nuns? You know, those are the kinds of issues we deal with. In a meeting we had in 2008, we monks dealt with the question of celibacy. What does celibacy mean in our two traditions? Because Buddhist monks are also celibate. The one thing about Buddhist monks, of course, is that they don't necessarily remain monks all their lives. Okay, but as a monk, they are celibate, except in Japan, and then they're not really monks so much as priests. Okay? So, and again, my position has been, you know, Christians didn't invent monasticism. Monasticism was around for about 1,000 years before there were Christian monks, and so Buddhist monks might have a deeper and longer repository of wisdom to draw on that we can profit from. So that's the point behind our coming together. What we've started to do, and this is from 2011, we began an online journal. We also have published in book form the proceedings, the main articles in those journals. We call it Dilatato Corde. Again, we're an international organization. You notice our what do I want to call it? The logo is DIM-MID, Dialogue Interreligieux Monastique, Monastic Interreligious Dialogue, to show that we are international. And so that was part of the reason for a Latin title for the thing, but also because in the Benedictine rule, St. Benedict writes that as monks progress in the following of Christ, in the monastic life, their hearts expand and they run the way of God with inestimable joy, something like that. So hearts expanded, dilatato corde. And so the purpose of this journal is to offer anyone the opportunity of saying, how has my heart been expanded because of my relationship with another religious tradition through dialogue? How has that expanded my heart? And so that's what's behind it. You know, you just go online and you find it on our website. That's our website. And then you can just go over to the left there, current issue, you know, those sorts of things. So, and it's multilingual. De facto, most of the articles are in English and French, but you know, but that's what that is all about. Basically, we'd say, I think monastic interreligious dialogue is all about hospitality and friendship. One of my most significant, I would say, and interesting experiences in dialogue was going on a tudong with a Buddhist monk, Jotipalo. We walked the Paul Bunyan Trail in Minnesota for about 100 miles. A tudong is a religious practice of the Theravada Buddhist monks. You simply walk in confidence that your needs will be met. You take no food, you take no money. Now, I had money, just in case. But Jotipalo didn't. And let me just give you one little incident of something that happened on that walk. You know, we would be welcomed by people to spend, we carried our tents, but if people welcomed us to stay in their home, we stayed. And one day, it was a Sunday, the people with whom we stayed took us to Mass. The pastor, it was the Paul Bunyan Trail is in northern Minnesota where there are a lot of weekend people going up to their cabins. So the pastor began his, first of all, he introduced us, why we were there, who are these strange people in their robes, and what we're doing. And then he said, you know, I just want to assure people that this, there will be 2 collections at this Mass. The second collection will be a home for battered women, and that should assure all of you who are wondering if this is a Catholic church or not. It is a Catholic church. There are 2 collections. And then he went on. So I leaned over to Jotipalo. I had, as I said, some money with me, just in case. And I said to Jotipalo, should we give something to that second collection? He said, of course. I said, how much? Expecting he'd say maybe $5, $10, $50, he said. Oh, I could think, my God, we'll starve. If nobody comes along with food for us, we'll starve. I had $40 in my pocket. That's all I had on me. So when the basket came around, I put $40 in. After Mass, a woman sitting right in front of us turned around, shook my hand and said, I am so happy to see what you people are doing. Thank goodness. And left a $20 bill in my hand. I go outside, the same thing happens. Somebody comes up to me, shakes my hand and says, thank you for what you're doing, another $20. So I said to Jotipalo, I can't believe it. He said, well, of course. I knew that would happen. And I thought, okay, we may talk about providence and confidence in God, but there's something there that, you know, he stimulated that and provoked some good word. So that was my tudong with Jotipalo. This is a meeting that the European Commission had in Norway, and we're meeting there with Sami people. The Sami, the Laplanders, you know, again, another ancient tradition. Yeah. And at table, you know, I mean, that's where much of the stuff goes on. This is an English Benedictine nun in Turvey Abbey in England, and they have a great rapport with the monks at Amaravati. Jotipalo, by the way, is from a Buddhist monastery in Ukiah, north of San Francisco. They're basically Thai background, the Thai forest tradition. And these monks at Amaravati are from the same tradition. And it's an interesting thing. Their monastery is built very near the ruins of an old Benedictine monastery, which of course was suppressed in the 16th century by Henry VIII, okay? One of the monks who was there said they go on their begging rounds every morning, you know, with their alms bowl through the streets. And as they're walking through the streets in their saffron robes with their begging bowls, one of the monks hears one of the women on the street tell her friend, isn't it lovely? The monks are back. 500 years later, the monks have come back. I mean, and that says there's something universal about this monastic thing that people recognize, you know. But the monks are back. It's just great. And that's from our last meeting at Gethsemane, again, with some Chinese, Taiwanese Buddhist nuns and the person who's the head of the interreligious dialogue in these states. Now, something on monastic dialogue with Muslims. Why do we do it? There are no monks. There are no monks in Islam, okay? But as Daniel Pont, who was the coordinator for the European group, said in a documentary film, they have a deep spiritual practice, presence of a master, discipline of fasting, a daily liturgy of the hours. 5 times a day, okay? And a tradition of reading the Quran with great devotion. Their spiritual practices are very similar to ours. And so we want to enter into dialogue with them, on this level of spiritual practice. The great inspiration for monastic interreligious dialogue is the example of the Trappist community at Tiberin. Some of you are familiar with, and I'll have a clip from the movie of Gods and Men, that film. But Christian de Cherché and the monastic community at Tiberin, a community that was just so integrated into that local Muslim community. It was, if you see the movie, you sense that almost more than anything else. Kidnapped on the 26th, 27th of March, so this Easter Sunday was the 20th anniversary of their kidnapping by the rebel group in Algeria at that time, most of whose victims were Muslims. Not Christians, Muslims. It was again this it was a rebel group within the country. Call them, revolutionaries, terrorists, I don't know if it's the right word, but they were the ones who kidnapped them. Whether they are the ones who killed them is still uncertain. There is a great possibility that they were actually killed by French security forces who were attempting to liberate them, and it went south and they were shot. Their bodies have not been recovered. Their heads were delivered shortly after the 21st of May. And these are the 7 monks who were kidnapped and killed. Christophe, well, you see them there. Christian de Cherché is a remarkable figure. He spent part of his childhood in Algeria, as you may know. His father, during the Second World War, was a military commander in Algeria, had an artillery unit there. But he says, and we'll see this on the clip, it was his mother who taught him respect for Islam. He studied at the Pontifical Institute for Islamic and Arabic Studies in Rome, and became deeply immersed in Islamic spirituality. In the film, you see him with the Quran on one side and the Bible on the other as he's preparing his conferences for the community. His main, I think, expression of this deep respect and reverence for Islam was this group of Ribat es-Salam, the bond of peace. Twice a year, he would gather with local Muslims, not for any dialogue. They would simply meditate on a certain theme for 6 months and then come back and share, what that means to him, whether it be mercy, forgiveness, prayer, whatever. And now I do want to show you, as I said, a clip from that film, which to me indicates more deeply than anything else I could think of in the film, of how much his knowledge of the Quran and Islam enabled him to be in a form of communication with the leader of this group. This scene takes place on Christmas Eve, 1993. Okay, Christmas Eve, they come to the monastery, and later I'll refer to what that had to do with his testament. Yes.
Il doit venir avec nous. C'est impossible. J'ai 3 blessés qu'elle doit soigner à 1 heure de route.
Il ne peut pas partir d'ici. Il est malade, il est vieux, il a des crises d'asthme. Frère Luc a toujours soigné les blessés qui viennent au dispensaire. Il soigne indifféremment tous ceux qui ont besoin de lui. Il se fiche de leur identité. Nous continuerons à faire de la sorte, mais rien de plus.
Alors vous allez nous donner des médicaments?
Nous manquons de médicaments. Tous les jours, nous soignons 100 de nos frères musulmans.
Assez! Vous n'avez pas le choix.
Si. J'ai le choix. Nous ne pouvons pas vous donner ce que nous n'avons pas. Vous n'avez qu'à demander à vos frères du village. Ils vous diront que nous vivons modestement, avec seulement les produits de la terre. Vous connaissez le Coran? Et tu trouveras certes qu'il y a parmi ceux qui sont disposés à aimer les croyants, ceux qui disent « Nous sommes des chrétiens ». Et qu'il y a parmi eux des prêtres et des moines.
لا يستكبرون.
Voilà pourquoi nous sommes proches de nos voisins.
يلا نروحوا.
Vous savez qu'aujourd'hui, ce n'est pas un soir comme les autres.
Pourquoi?
C'est Noël. C'est le moment de l'année où nous fêtons la naissance du prince de la paix.
Le prince de la paix.
Sidna Issa.
Jésus. Excuse-moi alors. Je ne savais pas.
As I say, there's something about that scene. It's because Christian knows the Quran. He knows the passage in the Quran which speaks of Christians and monks and priests, and he begins reciting it in French. That leader continues in Arabic, and then adds, "Tonight we celebrate the birth of the Prince of Peace." And again, knowing how much reverence Muslims have for Jesus, Isa, as they call him in Arabic. It's very moving every time I see it, because it's incredibly tense, the scene. As I said, Christian, one of my favorite expressions of his is, I couldn't find it exactly this way. To speak of God in another way is not to speak of another God. The closest I could find was in his book, Invincible Hope. To see things differently does not mean that we do not see the same things. In the same way, when God is spoken of in a different way, this isn't to say that God is spoken of in other way. This is not to say that he is other, but that he is the utterly other, the completely other. He's different from every other, It was interesting, just this morning, in our liturgy of the hours, I came across this reference, if I can find it right here. Yeah, this is from a document called The First Apology of the Martyr Justin, who lives about the years 100 to 165. And in the reading that we had in our liturgy of the hours today, for the liturgy of readings, Justin says, "God so far surpasses our powers of description that no one can really give a name to him. Anyone who dares to say that he can must be hopelessly insane." Justin Martyr, the year probably 130. Anyone who thinks he can describe God or name God has to be hopelessly insane. I think Muslims would agree that God is the utterly other. That's what this means. Now, Christian was already, and the community is aware that their lives are in danger if they stay at their monastery. So in December of 1993, Christian writes his last will and testament, which he wants to be open in the case that he suffers a violent death by his family. After this meeting that we just saw on Christmas Eve of 1993, on January 1994, he revises it. And that is what was opened on Pentecost Sunday in 1996 by his family. It's an amazing document. I consider it one of the spiritual classics of the 21st century, or the 20th century, rather. And I've actually duplicated or had it duplicated for you. So, but just one thing that always strikes me is that last line, that the secret joy of God is to establish communion and refashion the likeness, our likeness to God, playfully delighting in the differences. That's beautiful. That God playfully delights in the differences of his creation. So there it is. That's what you'll get. You'll get both the French and the English version when it comes. So, I'm actually going to skip because the time is already 15:15. This was to show you of some examples of the dialogue that's taking place in the United States with monks and nuns and Muslims. I was going to show you a clip for our documentary on a Sufi master from Algeria, which is very nice, but we have to go without it. And then a bit about our own dialogue, monastic interreligious dialogue with Shia Muslims. The next one is coming up next month in Qum, in Iran, on human dignity and human rights, which I think will be probably our most maybe difficult one to navigate, but we'll have to see, especially when it comes to questions of freedom of religion and especially with Iranians, the death penalty. I think that's going to be a big one. That dialogue actually got started with Abbot Timothy Wright on the right and Muhammad Ali Shomali, who met in England and got going that way. Let me just show you this one clip, because this one I think will...
Certain, c'est que notre monde aujourd'hui, qui communique tellement, est loin d'abattre les caricatures, au contraire. Et le désir de paix qui est au fond de tout cœur humain passe par la rencontre. Et voilà, l'Esprit Saint nous guide, on ne sait pas très bien, je ne sais pas très bien où je vais avec ça. Aujourd'hui, c'était à Assise et très heureux d'y être.
This is from our dialogue in Assisi.
Our spirituality, it's very important for our relation with God that we are accommodating other people in our heart. We love them, we want to serve them, and then in this way, hopefully, we can get closer to God. So this is very important part of Islamic spirituality, and I think spirituality of any other faith. Otherwise, we would be bringing God down to the level of, tribal God or, ethnic God. We have to, raise ourselves to the level of God.
He's a remarkable figure. He really is, and we're privileged to have him. I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way here. So, Christianity and the Road Ahead. I love this. This is from the local dialogue with Somali Muslims in St. Cloud, small city in central Minnesota, which has had a huge influx of Somali refugees and which has just changed the demographics of that city. But this is what it means to collaborate. But I think that in some ways it's so significant because it's grassroots. It's out there in the fields, but it's working together. It's not a big thing, and yet a sign like that, I can imagine many drivers going by and saying, "What? What is this?" And probably we're making more of an impact in central Minnesota with this than all kinds of official proclamations we can put out. We adopted a road together. We're picking up trash, and we're doing it together. And I love it. I love that side. There are a lot of... Let me just skip through, because what I want to say is where we hope to go. I'm picking up again, we've seen this already from John Paul, partnership for the good of the human family. Now, just a few little things that I would hold out in my limited experience, some of which I'm sure I've already experienced. Dialogue is not between religions, but between religious people. So we're talking about ourselves. We're talking about our faith. We're not, and it's always good in dialogue of any level to use I language, personal language, not, they or the Catholic Church, but what's in my heart is not apologetics. It's not there to explain why our position is right. That's not what it's about. Yeah. Does not compare our best with their worst. That happens again and again and again and again. We just comparing, for example, Bible and Quran. We pick out these beautiful verses from the Bible and we go hunting for the worst things that sound that way to us. Kill those infidels. And we totally forget we've got a lot of those passages in our Bible as well. Every tradition has its embarrassing scriptures. Every tradition does. And we have to learn to deal with those. We have to learn there are different ways of interpreting them. Jesus says if your right hand offends you, chop it off. Well, why aren't we taking that literally? We've got all sorts of things. So we never compare our best with their worst. And it's something we can easily do even without being aware of it. Does not equate being different with being wrong. And I put a little Japanese in here. That word is pronounced chigaimasu. And I was told by one of my Japanese professors, it's probably the second most common word in Japanese. Now, I think he's exaggerating, but still. Basically, chigaimasu means it's different. And if a Japanese person disagrees with you, it'd be very rare that the Japanese person would say you're wrong. Very rare. He'd say, oh, that's different. That's different. Chigaimasu. And again, do you remember what Christian de Charget said? To speak differently about God is not to speak about a different God. And if anyone thinks that he or she has the ultimate word about God, Justin Martyr would say he's hopelessly insane. So that's proceeds through friendship. Sant'Egidio is an organization, a kind of intentional community in Italy, and that, it says, is the only way you proceed. You proceed through friendship in dialogue. Friendship is the basis of it all. So before you get into all sorts of theoretical discussions, become friends. That's what it's all about. Works best, as I said, in first-person language, and leads to and follows from collaboration, dialogue and collaboration. If there's not something we're able to do together, then we're not really there yet. And then, just to end with, this apostolic exhortation that came out from Pope Francis just recently, following the Synod on the Family. He has a section in there on dialogue. Now, he's talking about dialogue between husband and wife. But amazingly, I find what he says we all can learn from. So dialogue means shutting up for a while, too. Not blah, blah. Listen to me, listen to me. Like everyone has the right to exist, to think as they do, and to be happy. Keep an open mind. And I think that's a great way to end. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for going over time.
Thank you very much. We have maybe 5 minutes or so if there are some questions.
I was hoping to leave much more time, but
if people want to come, if they want to raise their hand, and I'll bring a mic so that you can ask a question, and we'll take 5 or 10 minutes to answer any questions. Anyone?
Or make comments.
Or make comments.
Or disagree.
Okay, here we go. Oh.
I noticed in everything we've seen, mostly we only see men. What happened to the women?
Well, you saw nuns in the West. and frankly, no, we really are very, very intentional now about involving women. For example, the sister from England that I showed you was the leader of the interreligious group in England. And the leaders in France and French-speaking Belgium are both women. So they are really very, very much involved, very much involved.
Thank you, Father William. You mentioned in the course of your talk that dialogue is to respect and to preserve, but there's also an interior dialogue, so that when the dialogue with the other occurs, there's also a dialogue within that is sparked.
And in fact, there's a reference, Ramon Panikkar is the one who speaks about intra-religious dialogue.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was wondering in that spirit whether you might tell us, in terms of your own experience with Christian-Buddhist dialogue, how that has transformed you. Just briefly to give us an idea.
Well, I still do Zazen.
Yeah.
And let me here's one example. The stories I think always work best. I did a sesshin, a Buddhist retreat, at a monastery in Okayama in Japan when I was there for the last 3 years, with a very authentic Roshi, one of these solid, just Buddhist to the core. And I went in for my individual session with him, and he doesn't speak much English. He speaks a little. He has an interpreter who works with him. But he said to me, and this was the second session I'd made with him. I'd made one in the United States. He said to me in a deep voice, I won't say it as loud as he did, "Where is God?" So I said, "Everywhere." No! He asked me again, "Where is God?" And I'm getting a little, and I said, "Inside?" "No! Get out!" Rings his bell, bow, out I go. I come back the next day. Now he's a little more gentle. And he said, "Where is God?" And I just went, "Yes," he said. "Get rid of your ideas about God, and then you will find God." Now that has stuck with me. That has stuck with me. And again, not to say that theology is words about God. Our natural instinct is to try and to put words to this. But ultimately, we have to agree with Justin Martyr, who thinks that he has the last word on God, is hopelessly insane. So, just be in the presence of God. And for me, that's Zazen. It's simply being, and in fact, Okumura, a Carmelite priest in Japan who grew up Buddhist, says he has come to understand prayer as being silent in the presence of God. That's prayer. Be silent in God's presence. And so those are some of the things.
Father, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Tom.
I just got back from Istanbul, and we arrived on Easter Sunday there, and we hired a driver and a guide, and we spent 4 days with this guide, and we didn't say the St. Francis prayer. However, we did pray when we had lunch, my wife, myself, and our guide, every afternoon. And we just said, "God bless our food." It was very simple. Mm-hmm. And this man gave us an education in his religion. I didn't realize that their main belief is that Moses, David, and Jesus and Muhammad were all prophets, but not God. And that was very simple for me to learn. Mm-hmm. But there was no problem having dialogue with this wonderful man that we spent 4 days with. We laughed, we joked. He told us he prayed early in the morning and took us into probably 20 mosques. And it was a wonderful experience. Yeah.
Again, the testament of Christian de Chergé is so significant because he accepts difference. Our way of approaching God, our way of speaking of God, understanding God to the degree that one can even speak about understanding God, it's different. But as he said, God plays with the difference. And the only way there can be a dialogue or a friendship is if there's difference. If we're all the same. And again, there's something very strong in the Quran too. God could have made us all the same, but did not. Yeah. So, but not to deny difference, and not to pretend that we're just like you, or that we in fact come out of very different traditions, in other ways very similar traditions. There's great overlap, but there are differences, different expressions. But that's the richness of it. You know, do the differences clash sometimes? Yes. And can differences be manipulated and misused? Yes. Have they been? Yes. Now, let me read you one thing that I came up with. I have to find it now if I can. Just a second. I think it's right here. Yeah, do you remember after the Charlie Hebdo shootings in Paris, not the most recent ones, but the Charlie Hebdo, Karim Abdul-Jabbar wrote an essay in Time magazine. Did any of you see that or remember reading it? Yeah. What he says, and I thought this was so significant, when the Ku Klux Klan burns a cross in a black family's yard, prominent Christians aren't required to explain how it isn't really a Christian act. Most people realize that the KKK doesn't represent Christian teachings. That's what I and other Muslims long for. The day when these terrorists, praising Muhammad or Allah's name as they debased their actual teachings, are instantly recognized as thugs disguising themselves as Muslims. Yeah. And that's what we need to recognize. Because it's too easy to take them at their word saying, you know, we are acting in Allah's name. No, as he said, no, they're not. They're debasing our religion. They're hijacking it. Okay.
Can you explain what a false god is and maybe give some examples?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
What is a false god, like according to the first commandment? Can you give us some examples of a false god?
Money, fame, good looks, all these things. I mean, and even the Bible says, you know, those who is it? Which letter in the New Testament? The pursuit of money, the love of money is idolatry. I mean, that's right in the New Testament. So there are false gods. Again, one of my experiences of being in Latin America, I was in Peru, where many of the Christian missionaries were trying to be more sympathetic to the religious traditions of the Aymara people in the highlands of Peru with Pachamama. And, you know, and other people were saying, no, these are false gods, you know. And he says, but what about all the false gods that are worshipped in the United States? You know, what about all the false gods that are worshipped, well, again, using this symbolically, on Wall Street? You know, those are false gods. And it's, you know, we can expand that notion of the false god. Now, again, I think you almost always have to go case by case by case. If there's let's say, an indigenous religion that worships its god by sacrificing infants, I think we'd have to say no. That we cannot accept. You know, that we cannot accept. But again, it has to be case by case.
Thank you for a beautiful and inspiring presentation. I have so many questions, but perhaps the one is there a moment after a length of spirituality that you arrive and say, now I am a monk? Did you have that aha moment? And after how long?
Oh my. No, it ain't arrived yet. There's a wonderful passage in a monastic writer from Australia, Michael Casey. He's just a wonderful writer. And in one of his passages, I think it's called The Monk in the City, is the name of the book, he says, most monks go to the cemetery with their faults intact. So ultimately, we all rely on the mercy of God. Yeah. Now, this is not to say that I'm not grateful for my call to be a monk. I'm not grateful for my being a monk. I am. But I see this as, well, in much the same way that Pope Francis talks about marriage. It's it's this wonderful ideal toward which married couples are always working. You know, when do you come to the point when you finally say to your husband or to yourself, finally, we have realized perfectly what it means to be a married couple? Maybe you do. It's all great. But I think for all of us, we always can see how much yet we need to grow in God's love and God's mercy. Thank you.
I think that's a lovely way to end our evening. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Certainly, we're seeing we're all on this journey of faith together, and part of the journey is dialoguing and talking and relating. And thank you for your presentation tonight. It gave us a lot of good information, but I think a lot of hope and a lot of, I hope, inspiration to continue the dialogue here at Holy Family. This is part one that the Muslim Catholic Steering Committee has put together. Maybe for a moment, those people who are on the Muslim Catholic Dialogue Committee, can you stand, please? Those have been part of us. Thank you very much. But yeah, so if you see them afterwards, and you might talk to them, but every second Wednesday of the month, we're going to have this dialogue going on. And if the room needs to be a bigger room, we'll get a bigger room. But we want to encourage people to have that. And so the committee decided to invite us as Catholics to understand our tradition in this. And then the following month, so a month from now, on May 11th, at the same time, we're bringing in Shihad Turk, who is I think a person that we all would get a lot out of to hear. And he really wants to hear your questions, your fears, your hopes, your understandings, your confusions. And I think we're in this. It's not just a one-night thing. It's an ongoing dialogue. And I hope that you might go out and bring another person a month from now. But to know that we're trying to do this and working toward this ongoing dialogue. And it's because of people like yourself who has been working on this, and then people on the grasswork saying, yeah, I know someone who's not Catholic or who's of another tradition, and we need to make that sign on the side of the road, the Muslim Catholic dialogue.
Adopt a road.
So we've got a lot of promise, and I appreciate all of you coming out tonight, and I hope that you come to the event next month, and then ongoing as we go forward.
I just want to well, first of all, an apology for not allowing more time for dialogue here, as I blab too much. I've given the PowerPoint to you. You're free to share it with anybody who wants, because it does some of those resources that I just skipped over. They're there.
Then we'll put it on
and they've got hyperlinks, and you can just go right
to
it. Sure, yeah, it's yours.
And they did live stream this for people who couldn't be here, and so we have your presentation. So thank you very much. And again, thank him for coming all the way out to sunny California. I mean, it was
such
really
a sacrifice.
Difficult. Yeah, and he had his short sleeve shirt on today, and was very happy about that. But anyway, this would not have happened without Angela Howell. And, and his relationship to Angela is because of her sister, who he married or witnessed their wedding some 40 years ago or so. And it's just a small world, and Angela's been part of the steering committee. She says, I think this would be a great opportunity to bring Father William out here, so thank you for that. And again, that's how we can spread the word, and just if you have an idea or you have someone that you think could work in this dialogue, bring it forward and see what we can do together. We certainly can do service together, we can have dialogue together, we can eat together, Anyway, it's good things, and I'm very proud that we're in this process and doing
I am
that.
too. I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, one of the last things is the ministry of the chairs. For those who are strong enough, if you could just stack chairs in tens, not in twos or threes, but in tens, and leave them where they're sitting. Those of you who could help, that would help us. The young people had lunch in here this morning, and the floors get cleaned tonight. So thank you. God bless. There's more food. Some time for conversation.